Throughout the inception of humanity, the Emperor has created warriors of untold power and heroics to combat against all the horrors of the galaxy that besiege them. Through this, he created the Astartes, but even before that, he created his demigod sons, the Primarchs. In the following passages, we will see them fall from their glory to their deaths. So, stay tuned for the death of the Primarchs here at One Mind Syndicate. Enjoy. Horus has commanded your death, but for the sake of our past friendship, I shall plead your case to him if you only throw down your arms. You have to surrender, Ferrus. There is no escape. Ferrus Manus tore his eyes from the slaughter of loyalist forces, his teeth bared with the volcanic fury of his homeworld. Maybe not, traitor, but only dishonor holds any terror for me, spat Ferrus. The Emperor's loyal warriors will not surrender to you, not now, not ever. You will have to kill every last one of us. So be it, said Fulgrim, launching himself towards Ferrus Manus, swinging his mighty warhammer. The Primarch's weapons, forged in brotherhood, but wielded in vengeance, met in a blazing plume of energy, and the battlefield was illuminated for hundreds of meters by their ferocious energies. The two Primarchs traded blows with their powerful weapons, the strength to defeat armies and topple mountains unleashed as they fought like gods. Ferrus Manus wielded his flaming blade in fiery slashes, every blow defeated by the ebony-hafted hammer he had borne in countless campaigns. Fulgrim swung his hammer in great looping arcs, its heavy head powerful enough to crush the armor of a titan to mere paste. Both warriors fought with the hatred only brothers divided can muster, their armor dented, torn and blackened by the fury of this conflict. To fight an opponent of such magnificence was a privilege, and Fulgrim savored every clash of hammer and sword, every fiery line cut across his flesh, and every grunt of pain torn from his brother's mouth. Ferrus cut the shoulder guard of Fulgrim's armor and spun inside his guard to deliver a lethal thrust towards his groin. Fulgrim stepped to meet the blow, batting aside the tip of the fiery sword with the haft of Forgebreaker and hammering the warhammer's head towards Ferrus's skull. The Primarch of the Iron Hands took the blow, dropping to one knee, but he then lashed out with his blade, the sword's fiery tip cutting across Fulgrim's stomach, opening his armor and tearing through his flesh. The pain was indescribable, and Fulgrim fell back, dropping his hammer as his hand sought to stem the blood pouring from his body. Both Primarchs faced each other on their knees, through a haze of pain and blood, and Fulgrim once again felt an ache of sadness well within him. The pain of his wounds and the sight of his brother's broken skull, coated in blood, tore a window into his mind. The sensation was like a powerful gust of fresh mountain air, clearing away the fog that had wrapped him in a suffocating embrace for so long that he no longer noticed until it was gone. "My brother," he whispered, "my friend." "You have long since lost the right to call me friend," snarled Ferrus, pushing himself to his feet, staggering towards Fulgrim with Fireblade raised to smite him. Fulgrim cried out, and his hand leapt unbidden to his waist as the flaming blade carved a burning path towards his neck. Silver steel flashed as he drew the sword he had taken from the Laren temple and blocked the descending weapon. Ferrus's sword hissed and spat as it bit into the silver blade, the Primarch of the Iron Hands' strength forcing the blazing metal, centimeter by centimeter, towards Fulgrim's face. "No," cried Fulgrim, "this is not right." The amethyst stone at the hilt of Fulgrim's sword pulsed with an evil light, bathing Ferrus's Manus face in a leering purple glare. Energy streamed from the blade, and musky smoke billowed around them, deadening sounds and obscuring sight. Fulgrim felt a monstrous presence swell around him, its power and nameless essence more intoxicating and dreadful than anything he could ever have imagined. With a cry of animalistic strength and rage, he surged to his feet and hurled Ferrus Manus back, spinning and lashing out with his sword. The silver edge bit deep into the breastplate of his brother's armor, and the Primarch of the Iron Hands cried out, falling to his knees once again as the blade's flaring energies parted his dark armor like a fingernail through cold grease. Hot blood sprayed from the wound, and Fireblade slid from Ferrus's hand as he gasped in fierce agony. "Finish him! Kill him!" the voice screamed inside, and to Fulgrim it seemed as though it echoed across time and space, as well as within his skull. He staggered with the blunt force of its imperative, lurching as though his limbs were not his to control. His normal grace was forsaken to him. Unknown energies ran along the notched blade and down the length of his arms into the meat and bone of his wounded body. Fulgrim was wreathed in purple fire. Crackling arcs of lightning caressed him with a lover's tenderness, seeking out his open wounds and licking them with balefire as they sought entry into his flesh. Fulgrim stood above Ferrus Manus, his chest heaving convulsively as his entire body shook with the violence of power that sought to claim him. "He must die, otherwise he will kill you." Fulgrim looked down at his defeated opponent and saw his own reflection in the mirrors of Ferrus's eyes. In an instant that stretched for an eternity, he saw what he had become and what monstrous betrayal he had allowed himself to be party to. He knew in that eternal moment that he had made a terrible mistake in drawing the sword from the Laren temple, and he fought to release the damnable blade that had brought him so low. His grip was locked onto the weapon, and even as he recognized how far he had fallen, he knew that he had come too far to stop. The realization, coupled with the knowledge that everything he had striven for had been a lie. As though moving in slow motion, Fulgrim saw Ferrus Manus reaching for his fallen sword, his fingers closing around the wire wound grip, the flames leaping once more to the blade at his creator's touch. "Kill him before he kills you, now!" Fulgrim's blade seemed to move with a life of its own, but it had no need of such impellence, for he swung the blade of his own volition. The silver blade clove the air as it swept towards Ferrus Manus, and Fulgrim felt the ancient triumph of the presence that he now knew had dwelt within him all this time. He tried desperately to pull the blow, but his muscles were no longer his own to control. Unnatural warp-forged steel met the iron flesh of a Primarch, its aberrant edge cutting through Ferrus's skin, muscle, and bone with a shrieking howl that echoed in the realms beyond those known to mortals. Blood and the monumental energies bound within the meat and gristle of the Emperor's sons. And Fulgrim fell back as the searing powers blinded him, dropping the silver sword at his side. He heard cries of pain, gunfire, explosions, and the rhythmic crack of bolters as they fired relentlessly. It was the sound of death, the sound of a massacre. His entire body ached with pain and loss, but Fulgrim pushed himself upright. Blood and the detritus battle surrounded him, the stoic figures of armored warriors staring in wonder at the headless body that lay on the black ground before him. Fulgrim took a shuddering breath and raised his hands to the heavens, screaming his loss at the sight of his brother so cruelly murdered. Suddenly, Alpharius was amongst the killing tide, his attacks not following rhythm or pattern. One instant, he was in the front rank, the pale spear orbiting him, its blade a blur of blood and smoke as it cut through armor and limbs. The next, he was retreating and lashing out as the Huskarls moved into space. Then he was pressing close, hacking and stabbing like the butchers of the World Eaters, then piercing a throat with a thrust that was as light as a breath of the wind. Dorn drove into the Lernians, red splattering his face, Storm's teeth shedding blood. Then, with a suddenness that halted the shallow breath in Archimus' throat, Alpharius' spear thrust up from the press of ranks, and Archimus thought that the sound fled from his ears as it drove it at its lord's chest. It was indeed a beautiful strike. In all his years of war, Archimus had never seen the like. Its simplicity, like a line drawn by a master artisan on a bare parchment. It was death and ruin, silence without end. However, Storm's teeth met the spear's thrust, and reality shrieked. A sheet of silver sparked exploded from the point at which the two weapons met. Alpharius and Dorn stood before each other, and it was as though the universe made space for the meeting of brothers. "I came here for you, Rogel," said Alpharius as he slid back, spear spinning. Dorn was cutting again and again, each blow churned by air. This is about victory, true victory. A Lernian stepped into Dorn's path. Storm's teeth cut up through the torso of the Terminator. Gut fluid and blood gushed out as dead flesh and armor fell. The Lernians and Huskarls were a shrinking circle around the two Primarchs. "Look at this. Look at what I have done here. This is not a war you can win your way," called Alpharius. Dorn stood before him, and the spear was suddenly still as his brother loomed above him, a sculpture of vengeance cast in gold. Dorn sliced downwards, and Alpharius raised his spear. The weapons clashed again, and suddenly the Alpha Legion Primarchs was spinning close, Storm's teeth arcing past him harmlessly. "But you are blind to what you are fighting. We are both fighting the future, Rogel." Alpharius lunged. Dorn jerked aside. Blink fast. The spear tip caught his shoulder and punched through the golden armor. Dorn staggered. "I did this so that you would understand," shouted Alpharius, "so that you would see that you cannot win. I am not here to kill you, brother. I am not here for Horus. I am here to give you victory." Dorn was astride in front of Archimus, blood and bright and scattering as he wrenched free of Alpharius' spear. The Huskarls fell, their legs cut out beneath them as Alpharius spun wide, spear arcing low like a scythe cutting through long grass. And now Dorn stood alone, blood running down the gold of his armor. "I know the enemy," said Alpharius. "I know your weakness and theirs, and I know the truth." Dorn stepped forward, storm teeth slamming down, battering into the spear blade in a blaze of light. Alpharius slipped to the side, and Dorn turned to the direction of the cut as it fell. But Alpharius was not where his movement should have taken him. He was behind Dorn's cut, the blade of a spear slicing down. "I can give you victory, brother," Alpharius urged him again. Dorn swayed aside, and the spear blade skimmed his chest. Slivers of gold and silver feathers fell to the deck, and Alpharius was overextended. Dorn was turning, his strength flowing into a wide lateral cut that would never land. It would never land because in that instant Archimus saw what was about to happen. Alpharius was indeed not overextended. He was exactly where he needed to be, to turn past Dorn's blow and make another, the last, perfect thrust with his spear. Archimus felt his blood-drained body try to move faster, try to push itself across the few meters separating him from his lord, whose life and service were the reason he did not fear. Dorn cut. Storm's teeth blurred. Alpharius swayed back, pivoting and sliding a hair's breadth past the screaming edge. Archimus lunged to his lord's side, his blade reaching for the spear thrust even as it unfolded. And his blade indeed caught the haft of Alpharius' spear, but the force of the connection kicked through his metal arm like the kiss of lightning. Archimus reeled back, staggering to the deck, and the spear struck home. It rammed through Dorn's armor and into the flesh. It stopped. Dorn stood, unmoved, the spear embedded in his shoulder where he had stepped in to take the blow. His left hand was locked around the spear's haft. For an instant, the two Primarchs were an arm's reach apart, eye to eye. "Brother," Alpharius began. and Dorn hacked Storm's teeth through Alpharius' arms right above the wrists. Blood and sparks fell in the flash of gunfire. The world became a slow sliding tableau of movement. Dorn's face, stone cold, marked with blood and strobing shadows as he pulled the spear from his shoulder. Alpharius staggering, lashing out with a kick. Another cut, scything from left to right, Storm's teeth ripping armor like parchment. Red gloss sheen on indigo blue, and a demigod fell, his torso an open cave of meat and bone. The only sound, the growl of Storm's teeth, and the clang as Alpharius struck the deck. He tried to rise, strength defying the red ruin of his body, but Dorn still had the spear in one hand. But victory, Alpharius gasped. Dorn rammed the spear through his brother's chest. The tip punched through the power plant of his back armor. Alpharius' mouth opened, his eyes wide. A great wash of blood poured between his teeth. Dorn held him on the spear, the two so close that it seemed almost an embrace. The air around them was blurring like a heat haze in the blood struck of the floor. A high wail was rising with coil of wind, which circled the pair. Alpharius' mouth moved, forming words. Dorn was still for a second, his eyes blank and black in the carved stone of his face. Then he pushed Alpharius away. Snakes of light writhed through the air. The Primarch of the Alpha Legion staggered, mouth still moving. Dorn brought Storm's teeth around. The blade cut down through Alpharius' skull, and then tore free in a spray of blood and a detonation of light. The last planet of the solar system turned in silence. Explosions flashed. Ships glittered like snow falling through a winter night. Lives ended. They ended in small spaces with the air sucked away, in the roar of gunfire pouring through passages, in the spinning blackness where the last sight given to them was the blink of explosions in the light of stars. They also ended in the heart of a moon, with the blood of a being who had been more than human, but less than a god, pooling on a floor of cold iron. Dorn, Praetorian of Terra, looked down at the corpse of his brother. Around him the world turned. Groups of warriors appeared in fresh flashes of teleportation light. They spread through the vault as the doors crashed open and Kestros ran in. He saw a sight that none would have believed. A moment that should have stopped the galaxy on its axis. A Primarch dead at the hands of his brother, within sight of the world of their creation. But the solar system turned without pause, unknowing or uncaring. His last words were ready in his mind, finally to be released onto his tongue, and thence into the world, and finally history's pages. They had been there since the very beginning, waiting for this moment, the culmination of his wicked life foreseen. They would be said. Their time was now. Fate demanded it. The last moments of his life approached. Curze fancied he heard the grains of time run out. The door opened, and death stepped within. Assassin, come. One will reach this palace. Her name is Mashen, and she too does the work of justice. I am no better than the millions I burned on Nostromo. I am the murderous, corrupt villain that the Imperial Declarations name me. I will greet this death gladly. I punish those who wronged. Now my own wrongs will be punished in kind. A delicious and balanced justice. And in this murder, the Emperor will once again prove me right. I was right to do as I did, and just he is right to do as he does. The Night Hunter was flung to the planet of Nostromo, a planet of criminals, a planet encased in darkness, and a planet that really was just a mixture of the Wild West and Gotham. It really showcases the putridness, the murderous intent, just the wrongdoings of humanity, and unfortunately Curze was exposed to that. And his thought process was, in order to do better, I have to be worse. And so he was as bad as they come. This guy decided to rule through fear and fear alone. So if you had criminals that were psychopathic murderers that just beheaded people, Curze would not only behead them, but flay them alive and showcase them to the world. And of course, he ended up prospering. He became the Dark King, and by the time that the Emperor came to reclaim his son, the world was prosperous and peaceful, all because of fear itself. Now, Nostromo and the way that it shaped Curze played a lot to his psyche and his personality, as well as how Curze was born. Curze was plagued, or I guess you can say blessed, depending on how you see it, with visions of the future. These visions were fate itself in his mind, and he knew that no matter what he did, the visions would come to pass. Just like when the Emperor came to reclaim him, he already knew about that, and he sided with the Emperor with no rebuttal. Now, unfortunately, Curze was very nihilistic, I guess you can say. He didn't see the good in humanity. I mean, of course, how could he? He was brought up on Nostromo, and anytime he did things that were evil or heinous, it was all because he had no choice. There was no free will in the mind of the Dark King. He knew that everything he did was preordained, and there was no way to stop what was coming to pass, which was his death. So since his birth, he knew he was destined to die because of the Emperor, and so anything he did, he kind of just played it off as fate. Was this a way to kind of justify his actions, a way to justify him joining chaos? It could have been, but then we get to the later part of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, where he plagues the Imperium with just heinous amounts of death and destruction. I mean, his legion was basically space marines that were from Nostromo, so they were criminals, murderers, elevated to these superhumans, and they were just the worst. And the Emperor knew this, so he used the Night Lords to basically run a campaign of fear and use the same methods that he did to conquer Nostromo to conquer other planets. If there were planets that weren't paying their tithes or were trying to defect from the Imperium, the Emperor would send the Night Lords, and just by them entering the airspace of the planet knew who they were, and they surrendered immediately, because they knew if they did not do that, they were in for a world of hurt. Flayings, scare tactics, they did not want to have anything to do with the Night Lords. So, knowing this, he hated his legion. He hated the people of Nostromo, and those were his legionnaires. So he hated them, he hated himself, he knew there was no free will, and all this negativity had a huge impact on his psyche, to the point where he was becoming insane. He ended up torturing one of his fellow brothers, the perpetual Vulcan, and he ended up killing him time and time again, but of course he couldn't die since he was a perpetual, and Vulcan did end up escaping. Further on in the Horus Heresy, he fought against the Lionel Johnson, to the point where he died. Konrad Curze was actually dead due to the wounds inflicted by the lion, but the apothecaries of his legion were able to bring him back multiple times, because he kept dying on that surgery table, but the apothecaries brought him back. I think it was something like 10-20 times, which is crazy to hear. But again, it's fate. He was not destined to die against the hands of the lion, so all those times that he was brought back, it was fate, or chaos if you will, playing a part in the life of this Primarch. Now, after the end of the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords still continued their reign of terror across the Imperium, and the Imperium had no choice but to send an assassin to take out the head of the Night Lords, aka the Dark King, Konrad Curze. They sent an assassin to go take him out on his own fortress on Nostramo, and he knew this was coming, of course. He did not do anything to stop it. He even ordered his legionnaires to not do anything against this assassin, and the assassin was able to enter the throne room. And from the last bits of information that we got from the recording devices, he died. The assassin accomplished the task of killing the Primarch, and that is because Curze wanted it to happen. He did not put up a fight. He did not do anything to hinder this task that the Emperor, or the Imperium for that matter, issued out. Because again, fate. It was all preordained. All these visions he had brought him psychological torture as well as physical pain, and over years and years and years of all this, he was a broken man, to the point where he just wanted it to be over. And in this little excerpt from the novels, it really shows you where his mindset was. Your presence does not surprise me, assassin. I have known of you ever since your craft entered the eastern fringes of space. Why did I not have you killed? Because your mission and the act you are about to commit proves the truth of all I had ever said or done. I merely punished those who had wronged, just as your false emperor now seeks to punish me. Death is nothing compared to vindication. And those were the last words of Konrad Curze. Now, even though the camera feed cut off moments before she beheaded the Night Haunter, it is confirmed that she indeed killed him, took his head along with a Corona Nox and a few relics, and simply walked out of the throne room. As she was walking across the halls, you could feel the intensity as all the Night Lords were just looking at her, some frothing at the mouth, ready to just tear her apart. But they did not. They could not. They had to follow their Primarch's orders all the way through, and that was for her to accomplish her task, and for her to be left alone after the task was complete. Everybody took notice and followed the orders, all but one, but that is for a video for another time. This is an excerpt taken from the book Visions of Heresy, which came out pretty much 10 years ago, back in 2013. Now, the reason why I wanted to cover this final battle between these two epic combatants is because in just a few short months, we will be getting an update to this battle in the Siege of Terra novels, and the new books will render this one null and void. So we'll see what the new canon stands for the lore, the history of this pivotal moment in Warhammer 30K / Warhammer 40K. So sit tight, guys, grab some snacks, because this will be an epic one for the end of the year. So with that being said, let's dive into the Visions of Heresy. The Emperor entered the command deck of the Vengeful Spirit and beheld Horus. The War Master bestrode the body of a broken angel. Behind him, the tortured planet filled the viewport, a bubble for Horus to seize with one clawed hand. Corpses of massacred custodians lay everywhere. Face glowing with internal bloodlight, Horus turned to the Emperor and spoke. Poor Sanguinius. I offered him a position of power in this new order. He could have sat at the right hand of God, but alas, he chose to align himself with the losing side. He gave me little alternative but to kill him. With my bare hands, I throttled the life from him. The Emperor stood transfixed by the grim tableau. One son dead, the other hideously transformed. He tried to force words from his frozen tongue, but in the end, he could only whisper, "Why?" Mad laughter rang out. Why? You ask me why? Have all those millennia taught you nothing? Weak fool, your timidness prevented you from binding the forces of chaos. Rather than tame your enemy, you merely antagonize them. You meekly refuse to take the ultimate power. I have done that which you would not do. I have bound the ruinous powers to my will, and I shall lead humanity into a new age of galactic supremacy. I have done this. I, Horus, Master of Chaos, Lord of mankind, true Emperor of humanity." The Emperor looked at his former favorite and shook his head. He knew well the trap that had ensnared Horus. "No man who ever lived can master chaos," he said quietly. "You believe me weak to have not followed this course. You have deluded yourself. You are the servant of chaos, not its master." A look of rage transfigured the War Master. He stretched out a hand, and a bolt of psychic force leapt forth. The Emperor screamed in agony as it wrecked his body. "Feel the true nature of my power, then tell me I am deluded," roared Horus, his voice that of an angry god. Beads of sweat stood out on the Emperor's forehead, but he steeled himself against the pain. He could sense the taint of chaos infused through the power that Horus wielded. He recognized the touch of the 4 ruinous powers. "You are deluded," he said. Once again Horus gestured, and lances of pure poison seared through the Emperor's veins. "I let you come here, Father, so you could witness my triumph. Kneel before me, and I will spare you. Acknowledge the new Master of mankind." Desperately, the Emperor summoned his strength, and he lashed out at his miscreant son. Lightning flickered between the combatants. The stench of ozone filled the air. The Emperor leapt forward, sword raised, weapons clashed as the battle was joined on every level: physical, spiritual, psychic. Bolts of force flashed back and forth as the demigods clashed, balancing the mere fate of the galaxy with every blow. Rune sword and lightning claw rang against each other with a sound of like thunder. Energies potent enough to shatter planets were unleashed. The chamber was filled with fire and brimstone, and the vengeful spirit shook from prow to stern. A backhand swipe from Horus knocked the Emperor through a stone bulkhead. His counterstroke tore a supporting column out of the ceiling as the War Master ducked. The Emperor could sense chaos in the warp. They howled with glee and rage as they fed their pawn more and more power. They had waited long for this chance to strike at their most hated foe. The Lord of Humanity stood alone against their massed might, and he knew that he was losing. Somehow, he could not make himself bring his full force to bear on Horus. The War Master might be traitor, but deep within him was still the favored son, the finest of the Primarchs, the beloved scion. Horus showed no such restraint. A lightning claw cut through the Emperor's armor as if were mere cloth, shearing through flesh and bone. The Emperor riposted with a psychic stroke intended to disrupt the War Master's nervous system, but Horus laughed as he easily deflected it. His claws raked the Emperor across the throat, crushing his windpipe and severing the jugular. The Emperor gasped for breath as his blood spurted forth. He staggered, clutching desperately at his neck. Another blow severed the tendons of his wrist, causing his sword to drop from the nerveless fingers. Insane laughter echoed around the chamber. Horus broke several ribs with an almost playful punch. A surge of energy seared the Emperor's face, melting flesh till it ran, bursting an eyeball, setting hair alight. The Emperor stifled a moan and wondered how he could be losing. Blackness threatened to engulf him. Horus then grabbed his wrist, splintering bones. Blood pumped from the Emperor's throat. The War Master lifted his foe above his head and brought him down across his knee, breaking the spine. For a second, the Emperor knew only darkness. Then a flare of agony brought him back to consciousness as Horus ripped his arm from its socket. The War Master howled with bestial triumph. Suddenly, the battering stopped. Through his good eye, the Emperor saw that a solitary Imperial soldier had entered the room. Without hesitation, the loyal warrior charged towards the War Master, his blade in hand. Horus looked and laughed. For a moment he stood triumphant, allowing the bodyguard to see what he had done to his Emperor. The Emperor instantly realized what was going to happen next. He saw the gloating triumph on Horus's face, knowing that his loyal servant was about to die. There was no trace of his beloved son left in Horus. Whatever humanity he had once possessed had been all but eradicated, and now there was only a demon driven by insane, destructive fury. The War Master turned his burning gaze on this soldier, and his armor was blasted apart. His flesh flaked away to reveal his skeleton, and then even that was gone, simply reduced to dust. It was over in mere moments. The Emperor was stung by the death. He had known this warrior for centuries. This was not a fitting reward for such duty and loyalty. Horus should so callously and casually kill him, without ceremony, without mercy. This jolted the Emperor. It finally showed him that Horus, the one he knew and loved, was gone, destroyed by the chaos of madness and the power he had embraced. He had hoped that he could somehow rescue the War Master from the thrall of the ruinous powers, cleanse him of this sickness, and bring him back into the fold, and end this conflict forever. But now he knew that there was only one way he could do this. The grip of chaos was too strong, their claws sunk too deep. The Emperor must kill his favored son to break their hold on him. He must strike one deadly blow. He knew he would get no other chance. The Emperor used the brief respite won by him by the death of his bodyguard to gather his wits. Mustering every piece of concentration, he focused his psychic might into a bolt of pure force, more coherent than a laser, more destructive than an exploding sun. He hurled the bolt of Horus, a lance of power destined for the madman's heart. Horus sensed the upsurge of energy and turned to face the Emperor, his look of surprise turning to one of horror as he realized the strength of the attack and the doom surrounding it. The Emperor's psychic bolt struck the War Master. Horus screamed as the destruction rained down upon him, and he twisted and writhed in titanic agony. He strove frantically to counter the Emperor's death blow, but his struggles became even more feeble as the lethal energies played all across his body. Driven by all the force of his rage, pain, and hatred, the Emperor willed Horus's death. He sensed the forces of chaos retreat, disengaging from their pawn. As they did so, sanity returned to the War Master. The Emperor saw the realization of the atrocities he had committed flicker across the face of Horus. Tears glistened there. Through the torrent of the Emperor's psychic assault, Horus howled in pain and remorse. He painfully uttered his last words. "I have been a fool. I was so wrong. Everything is ruined. I have betrayed you, my father. I do not ask for forgiveness. End my torment. Kill me now. I am too weak to resist them. They call to me. Please, end this." Horus was free, but the Emperor knew that he himself was dying, and that the powers of chaos might once again possess the War Master, and that he would not be able to stop him a second time. It was too great a risk. Horus must die. Yet for a brief moment, looking into his old friend's face, he hesitated, unable to do the deed. He then thought of the slaughter that was still going on outside. That might go on forever. Resolve hardened within him, and he forced all mercy and compassion from his mind, emptied it of all knowledge of friendship and camaraderie and love. His remaining eye locked with Horus, and he saw understanding there. With a full code knowledge of what he was doing, the Emperor destroyed the War Master.